Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Guy, for joining us this evening in the In Conversation event with independent socialists in Wellingborough. We're a small local group in Wellingborough, active on issues of social concern. We campaign on local and national issues. And one of the issues which has obviously been at the front of our mind in recent weeks is the COP26 events up in Scotland. And concerns about the environment have been high on our and other people's agenda. And we thought that the politics of food, of which you are very much have written and contributed on in a variety of different forums, would make an excellent speaker for our little group. But we're really grateful that you've been able to join us. Isn't Zoom wonderful that you can join us without having to spend all day traveling up to Wellingborough and back again? So very much welcome you to this neck of the woods. In planning the event, you asked me to submit some questions to you. The obvious opening question is about you and about your history and how you came to be involved with Riverford Organic Foods and how you got here. So perhaps you'd like to kick off with an introduction about yourself, who you are, what your values are, how you got involved in Riverford.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. Paul, did you want to do your minute silence?
Oh, thanks for reminding me. Yes. As we all know, there was the deaths in the English Channel yesterday. Tragedy which in my view is both predictable and avoidable, but it's time, I think, for us to reflect on the deaths of over 30 people, one of the biggest tragedies of its kind that we've seen. So I'd like to suggest we have a 1 minute silence. Thank you. Okay, Guy, okay. Over to you.
Okay, yeah, so it's kind of how did it all begin and values and so on. So my parents started farming at Riverford in 1951, pretty soon after the war, and they wanted to do something useful with their lives. And they got a tenancy of from the Church of England, and all the land around us was owned by the church at that time. And yeah, started being mixed farmers, had 5 children. I'm the youngest. What is it, 70 years later, we're all, no, it's a bit more than that. We're all back on the farm running our own separate businesses, actually. So they were mixed farmers, but moved towards being specialist dairy farmers, I suppose, towards the end of my father's career. I started, having left the farm for a bit, I came back and I knew I'd tried working for other people and didn't really work. It had to be work for myself, and I wanted to be outside, and I wanted to do something to do with food and farming. And anyway, I hit on the idea of organic vegetables, and that was back in 1986. And I started in the best field on the farm next to the house I was born in, 3 acres, and I really didn't know what I was doing, but learned quickly, worked hard, and sold to local shops. Decided that I wanted to grow organically because I have to say it was partly because I think I could see that there was a very small, nascent, but potentially promising market. So it was, but it was also just not wanting to use pesticides. My brother had been in hospital with paraquat poisoning, and that was and I'd make myself sick spraying my father's barley when I was a teenager. I just didn't want to handle all those containers with skulls and crossbones on them. So that was the organic bit. I guess I did. Now, you asked about values, and I think most values are established pretty early in life, and I think I take mine largely from my parents, and I just always wanted to do something that was valuable and that was fundamentally in a useful, and that I would worry about how I was going to make money out of it later. And I think that's something that I definitely inherited, probably particularly from my father. He came from a kind of line of particularly useless, absolutely loathsome upper middle class, not quite aristocrats, though they thought they were, and ran a sugarcane and coconut plantation in Trinidad, where he is still talked about for being what a vile human being he was. So. Anyway, I don't need to worry about libel there because he's well dead. So,
he was a slave. He was a slave owner.
That's the history from which my father and I had to recover, I suppose. And so I started growing vegetables in 1986. Didn't know what I was doing. Sold to local shops and pubs and then local wholesalers, and then wholesalers in London that specialised in organic food. And by the 90s, we were selling to Sainsbury's and Waitrose. And in 93, I started, delivered my first vegetable box to 30 friends and relatives and so on. And that was, I think we were the third veg box company in the country. And by 2000, the early 2000s, that was our speciality. Decided to drop the supermarkets and drop the wholesalers and just focus on the veg boxes. So that is where we are today. I mean, I'm probably 90.
What's the size of the business now? How many boxes?
We will turn over 120 million this year. There are 1,100 co-owners. The business became employee-owned 3 years ago. So it has grown into quite a big business, and we have almost as many people working in the farms and that supply us and deliver veg boxes now all over the country. There's a satellite business in just outside Peterborough that does the kind of east and north. We did have other businesses spread around the country, but it didn't work on a smaller scale. Economics pointed us towards a more centralized approach. I'm happy to discuss that, but if someone wants to ask a question about it, but I'll leave it there. But now, so I did that's kind of where the that's how it started and how it developed and why it grew. I mean, obviously most businesses, if you compound that up, we grew at something like 50% a year for 30 years or something. And it's now 34 years since I started, I think. And it has leveled off now. We're probably growing at something around about 10% over the last 5 years through the kind of thick and thin of COVID and Brexit and so on. Which is a much more comfortable rate to be growing at. But I mean, I think I have to answer the question, why did it have to grow so fast? What drove me to do that? And I have to acknowledge that the world would probably be a better place in many ways if there weren't as many driven individuals like me who probably cause so much of the environmental damage by trying to do so much. And why did I have to do so much? Well, I think I had a desperate need for my father's approval, is the honest truth of it. Having spent many hours sitting in therapy, that's the conclusion I've come to. And I think you will find many entrepreneurs are of a very similar mindset, actually. And many people who are driven to achieve positions of power and influence are in almost all of them. I would almost swear that Boris Johnson is driven by Stanley's lack of overt approval for him. I feel pretty confident. I recognise all the signs in him, and clearly it can be a very dangerous, driving force. So anyway, I think I've answered.
But at least your driving force is being directed into a positive direction by way of being an active proponent of organic farming and ensuring that organic produce is much more widely available to people than it used to be.
I think so, and I think most people would agree with that, but not everyone. Some of my conventionally farming neighbours wouldn't, but yeah, no, I've always wanted to do something which was genuinely useful.
Yeah, just to move on to a slightly more controversial area. You're an organic farmer, but you also supply dairy produce, and you also supply meat produce as well, which albeit organic. Now there's quite a big debate raging, particularly in the light of COP26 and the future of our globe, in terms of that in order to save the world, we need to move towards, at least, to be vegan. That dairy produce and the role of cattle, sheep, and animal in the global food chain is actually quite damaging to the environment. What are your thoughts on that? And
I completely acknowledge that. I mean, I think one could say that farming, and probably in particular livestock production, causes somewhere between 15 and 50%, 15 and 50% of environmental degradation. If you look at just climate change, it's probably nearer to 15. If you look at loss of biodiversity, it'll be closer to 50, I think. And you can find many papers that will contribute towards different ends of that range. But if you look at that, in that range, it's going to be somewhere there. And the contribution of agriculture to UK GDP is about 0.6%. So clearly, we're, in terms of damage to economic contribution, we're way out of kilter. And there's no doubt that animal production is a large part of that. I have to say, full disclosure here, I am the son of dairy farmers, and my dad also loved keeping pigs. My brother, nephew and sister, continued with the dairy, and I'm an organic farmer, and it's very difficult on our land, which is not massively fertile inherently, to grow vegetables successfully without some use of animal manures. I am now in my, and I suppose the reason why I'm not an advocate of veganism, though I completely see its benefits, is that I don't know how to farm organically within a sort of vegan food system. I don't think it's impossible. There are some people doing it on quite a small scale. I think you have to be extremely careful about how you source any bit of organic matter you can, turn it onto compost and get it on the ground. Essentially, probably we need to get all the human sewage back on the ground. Stop putting all the horrible things in the drains that mean that it's potentially dangerous to have on the ground. But yeah, I completely acknowledge the argument, and acknowledge the kind of contradiction in what I do. I mean, actually, it was my daughter who wrote to me and said, "Dad, I don't know how you can call yourself an environmentalist when you're selling meat." So, completely, and she is vegan. Well, she's flexitarian, actually. She'll eat meat if someone else orders it for her, but she cooks it herself, which I think is a pretty sound position, actually. And she encouraged me, but she made me watch, Cowspiracy, which I expect some of you have seen, which I accept that it is made arguments that need to be made, but it was an outrageous distortion of the evidence, really. I mean, to suggest that animals are contributing 51% to global warming is just, if you take the most extreme example in the most extreme paper, you could come to that conclusion. But I really don't think that's a responsible way to make an argument, however good your argument is. Though, one could say the strength of their argument justified them using whatever, tools they could use to. So I hope that answers the question. Yeah. I'm not saying, the world would definitely be a better place if we all ate less, meat and dairy and eggs, and in particular, soya production, most of which goes into feeding, pigs and chickens, and to a lesser extent dairy cows, is obviously driving the deforestation of the Amazon, and it is, it's awful. I think there is an argument for grazing livestock, particularly in the southwest. A lot of our land really isn't suitable for arable food production. I mean, it could be rewilded, and I think there is an argument for that, and particularly some of the really poor quality land. But on the sort of grade 3 land that we're farming on, a system which involves grazing livestock does work very well. And grazing livestock did not cause climate change. Climate change, 90% of it is caused by burning fossil fuels. And I'm sure the oil companies are absolutely delighted that we're debating, veganism and so on, as opposed to.
I was just going to move on to that. But Michelle, before I do, Michelle, did you have your hand up? Did you want to ask a question or just make a comment?
My hand went up just to indicate that I'd seen the programme Cow Conspiracy as well. Because I don't know the arguments against it, I was quite shocked. But it's interesting to hear guys say that it perhaps wasn't reported in a very sort of balanced way. And that's because of your background, presumably.
I spent about a month after that reading around the subject, read every bit of evidence that I could, and went right back to the original sort of papers. I really did spend, and to get to their figure of livestock causing 51% of global, you have to take the most extreme examples in the most extreme circumstances. Feedlot beef, fed soya from a burnt down, Amazon rainforest and so on. If you do all that and consider that, that some of it is irrigated and so on, you probably can come to that figure. There is a lot of, tell me when you want me to stop, Paul, but there is a lot of debate about how you treat methane emissions. So, ruminants, cows and sheep have a rumen, anaerobic digestion in there to break down cellulose and make it sugar. Sugar is available, releases methane. And that's, what people largely talk about. But methane goes up, unlike CO2 that goes up there and stays up there until the plant brings it back down. Methane goes up there and has a half-life of between 7 and 10 years. So if you do the maths, if you have a constant population of ruminants on the planet, you are not contributing anything to global warming. It's a constant, dynamically constant state. Were you to get rid of all those animals, you would cause global cooling, actually, which is there is an argument for that. I'm not disputing it, but I suppose I do. I'm not an animal farmer myself. I eat minimal amounts of meat, but I do, on behalf of my neighbours and my family, I do find myself feeling upset at how they are demonized.
Absolutely. Obviously the logical argument would be that since human beings are the major contributor to global warming, then perhaps we should stop having human beings. That is a kind of an argument, isn't it? That you can't stop. Why shouldn't we have cows and sheep? And they've been around for a long while, and they've served human society for tens of thousands of years as we evolved as human beings. But I want to go back to your. Of
course, all these savannas in the world did have, bison or the equivalent of bison, exactly, or antelope,
and we eliminated them,
who generated the same amount of methane per acre as a cow. So it's not, it's not entirely new. I'm sure that there are more ruminants on the planet now than there were pre-industrial age, but it's not like there were none before.
To come back to the point that you started to make, though, that the most significant contributor to global warming, and you said something about that in today's newsletter, which I received, that's around COP22. I think I'll quote you. You said, to spend 2 weeks debating climate change while barely mentioning the fossil fuels which cause 89% of it should be unbelievable. Yeah. And that's the opening shot of your.
No, well, it's this has been an argument I've put quite a lot of energy into recently. There is a lot of, virtually all economists, including the reports from the IMF, from the OECD, including 4 ex-presidents of the US Federal Reserve, all conclude that the way to deal with climate change is to tax fossil fuels at roughly, say, $30 a ton of carbon now, rising to perhaps $70 in over 10 years. And their estimates are, I think it was the OECD one, that you would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30%. I can't remember whether it was 3 or 4 years, and the IMF was a bit more conservative. But you can imagine by 10 years, certainly by 15 years, the problem would be solved. So you're talking 2036. Whereas, we're talking about 2050 getting to net zero, if we're lucky, if everyone, does what they say they'll do, it seems extremely unlikely. And it's just so obvious that the conclusion is I'd much rather see a tax on fossil fuels rather than carbon, just because things work best when they're simple. Any complexity gives an accountant, and accountants are the ones who are trying to get in on how we manage carbon and account for carbon in the same way as we account for dollars or sterling or euros. Give an accountant a loophole and they will find it, and there will be loopholes in carbon trading. There already are. It's just, I completely despair of carbon trading, actually, and carbon measurement, but actually just to tax the fossil fuels. And even according to, I can't remember whether it was the OECD, I think it was the IMF, it would only take, say, one significant economy to do it and to start taxing imports. And they were pretty sure that the rest of the world would fall into the line pretty quickly. To my mind, it is the only hope, because I've spent the last 3 years trying to work out about how Riverford is going to get to net zero, and carbon trading and offsetting and reduction, and whether we'll sequester carbon in soil and how much and how you would treat it, and what happens if you go to hydrogenated vegetable oil rather than diesel, and how you account for all that. My God, it's just a load of tosh. The meetings, the endless meetings spent discussing this just drive me up the wall, and actually are standing in the way of quite often they're actually standing in the way of doing things that really really need to be done. I can go into what I mean by that if you like, but anyway, yes. So
perhaps you could say a little bit more about the wider position of the food industry and what the food industry needs to do as we move forward to both contribute to the aims of COP26 and to save the world, if you like. But how do we feed the world in the future? What do we need to do radically that both protects the environment but also enables human beings to be fed?
Okay, well, you've already touched on I would say definitely the number one issue is the consumption of meat and animal protein. So if you want a quick fix, reduce the consumption of meat, dairy and eggs. After that, try and eat in season. There are quite a few insanities within the food system which really should stop quickly. One is the air freighting of food. It's completely bonkers. Growing vegetables in heated glass, bonkers. Frost protection in orchards, bonkers. I'm afraid to say a lot of organic farmers use heat sterilization of soil to solve food. Again, bonkers. Our approach at Riverford is to try and get rid of the worst offenders and trying to work our way down. So we started off with 800 grams of carbon per kilo of fruit and vegetables, and we're now down to 400. And so that means no apples from New Zealand. We can just about get them from Chile, but I think that's got to go in time. So, probably we'll grow European apples. We'll invest in cold storage and controlled atmosphere storage, and work our way down, to something, more sensible. Would be about, a locally grown one would be about 30 grams of carbon per kilo. But they're also, the supermarkets have a lot to answer for in terms of, packaging and demanding continuity of supply, which involves, always bringing produce from around the world. You might say that supermarkets are just responding to, what people want to buy. I don't really accept that argument, but many people, that's what they would say. I don't know, there's a few things. It's incredibly complex. It's not an easy one to fix. So my approach is to deal with the madnesses first and worry about the smaller things later.
Tony had a contribution. Tony, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to broaden the discussion a bit about the different forms of food production. Two things really. One is what would you think about our eating insects? Insects hardly warm the atmosphere or heat up the planet at all, to my knowledge. Very high in protein. And beginning some experiments there. That's one thing. The other thing is, what is your view about synthetic forms of food, or what you might call artificially created food, there would appear to be quite a strong argument we could actually not fish at all, leave the oceans to the animals in the oceans, if we advanced means of sort of making artificial fish, which I believe is being begun.
Yeah.
Do you have any, so I mean, I don't sort of have any objections in principle to this, because I think, you know, science and technology could contribute to a better world and feeding the world's population. And I think that there's a little bit of a danger, I think, with organic farming, that it becomes very single track. So you sort of cease to look at other sort of options. And what do you think? What do you think?
I really agree with what you say. I also agree with what you say about organic farming by being blinkered. I don't, you know, there is a whole debate, for instance, I will come back to your two main questions, but then, for instance, is it better to not plough and disturb the soil as little as possible, which unquestionably helps sequester carbon and probably is better for soil life, but the only way you can do it practically is by using herbicides, in particular glyphosate, which does cause quite a lot of damage, you know, in our waterways, but also to soil life. But is that better than ploughing? And I honestly don't know the answer to that, and I could be persuaded that it's better to use glyphosate and not plough. So, I mean, I've fallen out with some people within the organic fraternity who, you know, for raising these issues around ploughing. Farmers, organic farmers probably plough and cultivate the soil more than conventional farmers. It's the great weakness of our system, that and our dependence on animal manures. So, you know, I think there are questions, and I don't, you know, dogmatism is almost always wrong. You know, so, and I am not a dogmatic organic farmer, but, you know, in this world, you have to, so often you have to pick what's closest to what you want to do. You know, if you try and, you know, really write all your own rules, you know, you're probably going to fail. You know, that's why I can't remember what it was called, the politician who went independent, wore a white linen suit. Didn't really get very far, you know. But anyway, to come back to your thing, insects, yeah, I wouldn't mind eating insects. I mean, you know, it's not culturally part of my food culture. I'd have to learn how to eat them. You know, I think in Africa people eat termites, and I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Not substantially different from prawns and things, really. I don't think.
No, I don't think
you
so.
Know, we've got funny shells.
Cook them, I imagine they could be delicious. Somewhat more contentiously, you know, synthetic meats, as propounded by George Monbiot, you know, it doesn't get me rushing to the stove and wanting to cook, I have to say. But and my suspicion that every novel food that we put in our mouths, or indeed that every novel chemical that we bring into our homes, brings some degree of risk. But, you know, I'm with you that I don't think, I think we, you know, to turn our back on science and to always look backwards, I think the world is in such a state, you know, we've gone too far for that with 7 billion, you know, inhabitants. We have to be prepared to look to science and the contributions that it can make. So I'm for synthetic meat, actually. You won't find many people within the organic industry that will say that. You know, I think it probably does bring some nutritional dangers like every novel food does. However, you know, look, I believe over 50% of calories consumed in the UK come from uber processed foods, you know, and those foods are not safe for us to eat. And, you know, and ask any nutritionist, doctor, you know, they are causing, you know, a whole host of, you know, problems to our health. So I doubt that synthetic meat would be any worse than that, and it would certainly bring huge benefits to the environmentally. I mean, if you you know, if people must eat meat, and you know, you listen to that George Monbiot put out a documentary about a year ago or 2 years ago, and I think it's some tiny area, one of the Midwestern states could produce enough synthetic meat to feed the world its current meat, using green energy to do so, and using some technology which is apparently already used in Finland to culture it. I can't remember exactly how it works, but yeah, no, it has the potential to deliver huge environmental benefits. I've got to say, I'm not going to be queuing up to buy it, but I wouldn't be, obstructing.
Perhaps Riverford could start an experiment with by supplying some of these products, insects on the choice menu or manufactured steaks. We could give it a go. I mean, I don't know what your customers or would think about it, but there you go.
I think I'll leave someone else to fight that battle.
Just to move again into a slightly controversial area, you've been quite a heavy critic of government policy around food and farming. I mean, I've read some of your stuff. Would you like to elaborate some of your more significant criticisms of the way the government responds, particularly post-Brexit? I mean, Brexit has obviously been a shock to the food industry, but where are we going to go, and what's your thoughts on future government policy?
My main criticism of government policy is that there isn't one. I think you could say that for all sorts of things, probably including the national health, is to let it fail, neglect it, not have a policy, and when it falls apart, somehow hope that the market forces will come up with a solution. I've already said that agriculture contributes 0.7% of GDP for somewhere between 15 and 50% of environmental damage. If you follow that logic through to use market forces to determine what your agricultural policy should be is clearly absurd. That's before you start talking about access to land, visual amenity. It's just completely and utterly bonkers. And so many of our current government are just so obsessed with market solutions to everything. It's just completely absurd, and I find it extremely frustrating. According to our local MP, and I'll stop. I won't say anything more because I would be libelous if I said anything more about him. But he's not a very pleasant man. We already have a market for regenerative agriculture. Apparently regenerative farmers, whatever regenerative agriculture is, are already supported by market forces. I would like him to explain exactly how that works, because I don't know where to go and buy regenerative food, and I don't even know whether I'm a regenerative farmer or not. I mean, it's just completely the kind of dogmatic, reach for market forces argument to everything is, it's just, I mean, I don't know what to say. It's just extremely frustrating, and it's leading us to hell. And that applies to agriculture. So,
where do you see under the current government's non-policy, or it is a policy, but it's a neoliberal, let the market determine the outcome. Absolutely. I mean, I'm an ex-economist from many years ago. Everything will work its way through market forces, supply and demand, et cetera, et cetera. I know as an economist that's rubbish, but that's what people are saying. But where does that leave us in, say, 10 years' time in terms of the farming industry?
Okay, well, the government policy, in as much as we have one, and it's we're going into our 6th year since Brexit now, aren't we? So the government policy is, when Michael Gove was there, he coined the phrase public money for public goods. In as much as there is a policy, that is it. So public goods would be, and I think they have refined that now to soils. There is, roughly a third of the money will go to kind of initiatives to the national parks, really, and maybe establishing this new natural forest. A third of it, I think, is supposed to go to soils, and a third of it will be other environmental things, looking after hedgerows, planting trees, and so on. But that's all very well, public money for public goods. You can measure the public money. How do you measure the public goods? How do you measure they're already talking about there being a market in biodiversity credit. I mean, who the hell decides the relative value of a bumblebee and a skylark? I mean, and then how do you measure how many of them there are? And then you get down to soil carbon, which is where a lot of farmers think that they're going to be getting their money. you know, I went to a farmer the other day who had sent, they're quite early in on the looking after soil carbon, and they'd sent their initial samples to 3 different labs and got 3 different results. You know, not just slightly different, very different results. And that's assuming that you've already decided which depth of soil you're going to measure where and whatever. We are no way in a position to start, you know, measuring those public goods. It's completely, the policy is hopeless. You know, that's why I say the only policy that counts, just tax fossil fuels. If you want to deal with climate change, tax fossil fuels. You don't have to do anything else.
Tony, again, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, just wondered whether a reliance upon market forces will lead to a sort of apartheid sort of food provision, cheap food imported and grown to low standards, expensive food, perhaps grown here in specialist areas, but of a good quality, but that only some people can afford. Do you think that could be happening in 10 years' time? In other words,
well, I had the privilege of listening to Michael Gove speak, and who absolutely promised us that that was not going to happen, that the food standards would not fall.
Oh, so that's all right then.
So it will happen then.
You know, so, you know,
obviously
it will
happen.
We've already signed the trade deals with Australia, and it's pretty clear what's going to happen, and it's going to be exactly what you say. You know, food self-sufficiency when Margaret Thatcher came to power, actually it was a bit after Margaret Thatcher came to power, peaked at about 80% in the UK. I think we're down to under 50% now, and it's falling. And that's going to continue. So we are going to import food produced to lower standards, you know, with no reference for the environmental damage that it's causing. So we're exporting the environmental footprint of what we eat. We're just exporting it to other nations, which are probably less well regulated and probably less well positioned to deal with the consequences. You know, and yeah, so I do think we should be trying to grow more in this country, you know, and you know, part of that will be eating less meat. You know, part of it will be less wastage in the food chain and at home. Part of it will be hopefully maybe even us eating a little bit less, some of us.
Guy, how can we encourage local farmers then in the UK like yourself? Could there be a joint incentive or government scheme between farmers in the UK, or certain farmers in the UK that are prepared maybe to give up some of their old school ways of farming, perhaps? Maybe incentives, or a corporate idea, right? If you buy from A and B and C and so on.
Yeah.
Do you have a viewpoint on that? And do you understand what I'm saying?
Difficult. It's very difficult to, you know, if we accept our government's rationale that, you know, market forces are going to determine everything, you know, you would say that we need clearly labelled food, which about how it's produced. You know, if we could measure it, what its carbon footprint is, what its impact on biodiversity. And then I think a significant number of people, probably a minority, but quite a large minority, you know, would choose to buy their food responsibly and support better agriculture. But we don't have that. You know, there is no labelling system that supports that. And what labelling we do have, even that is abused, because there is no, what was the local trading standards, you know, has been savagely cut, you know, but I think they're down to about 30% of their funding or something, you know, of 20 years ago. So basically they can do nothing. So people lie. You know, we had the horse meat scandal. I heard from someone who worked in fisheries, who went around taking samples of supermarket fish, that 50% of the fish you buy in a supermarket is not even the species you're told it is, let alone where it's caught or how it's caught. So there is no, under the current regime, there is no hope that you can buy your food responsibly, and that's all you can do to be responsible is to eat less meat, actually, I think, and eggs and dairy. So it's very difficult as a food citizen to change the food system as we stand at the moment. To give a glimmer of hope, I would say if you do find someone that you trust, a local market who's selling, let's hope they are their own vegetables, check on that. I mean, because a lot of people do lie, and if you eat meat, a local butcher selling local meat and a local dairy, all those, if you can, support them, even if they are a little bit more expensive, even if it's a little bit, really support them, because it's not just that you are supporting them, you are sending a signal to the rest of the food system, to the supermarkets, that you want something different. So I would argue that it really is, despite the fact that it's pretty depressing, the actual impression, it's less than 1% of our food systems that's represented by these alternative producers. But I still think, one should try and support them if you possibly can. That's
Can
a bit depressing answer.
what I plan to do is we'll take the, in a sense, the first 2/3 of the meeting till 8 o'clock. So I'm going to put to you another. We'll then have a 5-minute break while people get drinks, refresh, go to the loo, what have you. So 8 o'clock, have a 5-minute break. Then we'll come back for about half an hour. Would that be okay, guys? So
it's my wife Geeti who's going to join us here.
Excellent.
And Jeff are here. Come on.
She's happy to be in the background.
She is in the background.
She's in the background. But if you have a question to Guy, please ask it. It may be a question you've always wanted to ask him, but it's never been at home for you to do it. So please feel free to contribute.
To ask him questions.
Yeah, perhaps you've got a burning question you've always wanted to ask him, but never had it's never been around for you to ask it.
He's fully interrogated. He's absolutely fully interrogated.
Excellent.
Can I ask the obvious question? I mean, product by product, how much more expensive is your typical veggie box compared with the same items bought at Aldi?
Okay, well, if I had to give you a round, it depends what you're comparing it with.
You're comparing apples with apples, or apples and pears.
No, apples with apples and pears with pears. And
comparing a UK organic apple with the cheapest one globally. If you're comparing like with like, so UK organic with UK, supermarket bought, I think the premium, it varies. On our larger boxes, it would be about 10%. On the smaller boxes, because we still have the cost of delivery, it would probably be about 30% would be.
Right. That is in a sense the hub of it in terms of people who want to do it.
Yeah.
Because that 30% is the breaking point, and that is obviously something which has to sort of be addressed in terms of people's spending habits as much as anything.
I do think that our vegetables taste better, so hopefully we get more pleasure. But
also, I mean, if I could add, Guy, on your behalf here, I mean, you go way beyond in terms of conditions of employment for your co-workers you're not working on the same level that many farms outside of the organic sector and outside of the box, you're are working on. So Richard, it also is about that as well, not just the cost of.
I know. I mean, I think really it's just if everything ultimately simply comes down to a cost comparison, which is really when people are competing with their thoughts about what do they contribute their efforts and their time and their money to, they think, well, shall I give money to important causes, give time to important causes out there, which are not necessarily to do with the environment, to do with in terms of things like peace and justice, what have you. How much of my time, money, resources do I give to, simply saying, can I afford to spend 30% more than I normally would? It is probably the biggest of all factors, unfortunately. Still, these costs.
We all have a certain amount of money to spend, some more than others, on you might say on your discretionary money to spend on hopefully shaping a better world. But I also think we also have a certain amount of headspace to give to it as well. You know, how much, because all these issues are so incredibly complex to really get your head around them and make sure that you are spending that money wisely. You know, requires a huge amount of research and thought. And you know, so yeah, it's not easy, and just because you're paying more does not necessarily mean, I mean, I think if you look at the fashion industry, you know, just paying more for a t-shirt does not necessarily mean that it's being produced in better conditions. I mean, just to say, we do pay, you know, we are, you know, or any profits are distributed with the staff, we pay the voluntary living wage, you know, and in fact my salary and the managing director's salary is set by the rest of the staff, so it is you know, so you are paying for that a bit, I suppose, and further down the supply chain, we are starting to lean rather more heavily on our suppliers to make sure most of the vegetables come from a co-op of 16 local farmers, and we are leaning on them to make sure that they are also looking after their staff in a similar way.
Right. Brilliant.
Tony.
In a socialist world, Guy, wouldn't the state be taking some responsibility for saying that if children have food in school, if employers have canteens, if hospitals provide, as they do, meals for patients, all those areas that the state could control could be saying, this will be good food, locally produced, ethically produced. Is that a possibility?
Well, it is, and elsewhere in Europe that is done. I mean, public procurement is used, you know, as a really major way to change our food systems. You know, again, I come back to our country with a neoliberal economics, everything's being market forced. Actually, it's quite funny because they always used to hide behind European procurement laws, which made it very difficult to favour, you know, local sourcing and so on. It's extraordinary that elsewhere in Europe they don't seem to have any trouble doing it. And we're not in Europe anymore, so they can't use that.
We could start to sort of shift away from the the whole food porn thing. You know, there's this culture of food as pornography, I think, via celebrity chefs and stuff.
Well, yes,
via, you know, and obviously supermarkets have got an interest in that, I think, because it makes them more money, bigger margins and things. But actually, it's just about us eating decently, isn't it?
So Italy, for example, has a brilliant public procurement policy where all food in schools is sourced from Italy. It is organic and it's locally, you know, it's a really brilliant policy. But Italy also has a very pornographic food culture, you know, and which is where ours is inspired from. It's beautiful in enjoying cooking your food, and I think one should be cautious about criticizing the passion for that kind of cooking, which actually comes from peasantry. It doesn't come, you know, all those great cooks come from the people of the ground and the earth, and it doesn't come from the top.
Exactly. I mean, it's all simple food, really, isn't it?
And those celebrities
with good quality. Making
that. Yeah, I'm going off piece here. I'm a bit.
No, that's fine. Keep going off. Yeah.
It's. I don't know. I mean, I think Jamie Oliver did a great job of democratizing, you know, better food and making it accessible. Actually, I don't know. Yeah, I do kind of reject that argument. Actually, I think if you go right back to Franny Craddock, my youth, and you know, it was and Delia Smith and whatever, you know, they're not up themselves. They're not, you know, that is quite accessible. I mean, you know, maybe you go into Heston Blumenthal, it isn't, but I mean, and probably even Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall, I don't think is massively accessible either. So
I don't agree.
You disagree with that?
He's really peasantry.
He's
of course a near competitor of yours, is it?
He's an Eton boy.
Yes, with all that politics. But he is a competitor. He's also a friend, actually. So I bet.
But you can say these things. Anybody else wants to contribute at this point before we head for the break? So, you all happy? Everyone's suddenly rushing. Derek first, then Duncan.
Thank you, Paul. I mean, I'm finding this absolutely fascinating. I'm struggling at the moment to read this book, which I think you're probably familiar with, Feeding Britain Our Food Problems and How to Solve Them.
Oh, Tim.
Hi, Tim. You do appear in this.
Yeah.
And I find myself going round and round in circles with this one. Britain has got a tremendous reputation when it comes to food and data, etc., due to the fact that in the Second World War, we had to feed ourselves because of the fact that much our supply lines were disrupted for one reason or another. But all the statistics are there. And unfortunately, we were better fed in the 40s, 50s, and 60s than we are in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s. And I don't think many people below the age of 40 have actually ever eaten real food. The stuff which is produced in supermarkets, etc., I wouldn't give to a dog. It's tasteless. Processed food is incredibly tasteless. And food production has become a big money generator. And our people are being deprived of the pleasure of knowing what real homegrown food tastes like.
There speaks the man who grows all his own on his allotment.
Right, I'm just coming up to that. I've got an allotment. I know nothing at all about growing, even though I spend half my life there now. But I'm interested in what you were saying, because allotments, there is the same debate which is going on in farming. Do you dig or do you no dig? Do you use green manure or do you use cow manure, etc., etc., etc.? And we've got the full range on our allotment, and we sometimes have wars break out over which is the best way.
The Osbarton allotment wars are well known, Derek. We know all about them locally.
Next to the War of the Roses, the most important wars which we ever fought. But on a serious note, because what you're trying to do, you change the idea of, that we should really depend on vegetables which are in season. It's very hard to change people's minds who are 50, 60, or well, 40 onwards, because that's what they've been used to. I was lucky enough to go back into a school I taught in a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to the sixth formers there. They know far more about what we should be doing in terms of solving climate change and how we should be producing our food. And they were talking themselves about, why do we have to have everything every day of the year? Why can we not just live on what we can grow in a season? Why don't we use allotments more? I mean, it's fantastic to hear, and not a McDonald's in sight. And I think this revolution, which has got to come about, is going to be difficult, but I think it's got to start from the bottom. Use the people who are ready to be converted. And if I go back to the allotments, they should be as important now as they were during the Second World War. And there's an allotment in Kettering where this bloke is set up where he does no digging, no weeding, no watering, and produces vegetables of high class. And if he can do it over a period of 20 years, that should be spreading around. So that I can't remember what the figures are. I mean, they are in that book, but
I'm sure Guy would like him to get in contact with him so he can find out how he does this.
Not many people want to contact anyone from Kettering, but I understand what you're saying, Paul.
Yeah. There are quite interesting producers, vegetable producers, because it's completely different doing an allotment to mass vegetable production. Obviously, you can't compare them. It's just a completely different thing. But there are some really interesting vegetable producers who are doing it, but still on a small scale, which will make cool. the old geezer who came and helped us look at the land.
Oh, Ian Tolhurst.
Ian Tolhurst does it very interestingly, but it's still on quite a small scale, isn't it?
20 or 30 acres. But I think there is a lot. I also clearly do know a lot about vegetables. So I think there's a lot of farmers, you know, to be honest, they get in their tractor, you know, they turn on the air conditioning, turn on the radio, close the door, and they have no connection with the soil. You know, their agronomist comes out and tells them which sprays to put on and how much fertilizer, and they've lost the plot, a lot of them. I mean, they really have. You probably find a lot of allotment holders actually know more about the intrinsic nature of what it takes to grow a good vegetable than a lot of farmers do. You know, I say that with some reluctance, but I mean, it is, farmers have become tremendously de-skilled, you know, and in a, so I do look to the next generation. I mean, there are my nephew just left agricultural college a couple of years ago, and mostly found it a fairly depressing experience, because, you know, there was still the whole thing about pesticides and fertilizers and was being shoved down their throats. But through him, I've met quite a lot of people who have really quite an inspiring approach. There is another generation coming through who are thinking about things in a very different way, a more holistic way, thinking about the whole farm and thinking about, you know, wildlife and ecology and soils and animal welfare in a way that that their parents, you know, never would have been. And that is probably one of the most encouraging signs, I think.
I'm going to, sorry. Yeah.
Well, you also talked about seasonality, which is really important. And I run restaurants. I own restaurants, so 30 organic restaurants, and pubs, actually, they're pub restaurants. But so I've always tried to buy seasonally. And what stops restaurants doing that is having a set menu. It's not possible. So when I was London based, I'd buy off small farmers around London, really small producers who could do the exciting type of thing that you were just talking about with vegetable growing. And you get the most phenomenal and beautiful vegetables, but they call you on a Monday and tell you what has or hasn't worked this week. You know, the frost has killed it, or something's killed it, or it has or hasn't. So you have to continually change your menu, and that, you know, it's the same way we eat at home, but we're not set up for it. But I don't think it could. I think what Brexit and the pandemic has proved is that we can actually shift very fast. And what's interesting about Brexit is we've lost so much and no one's really talking about it. We're just getting on with it. I mean, it could be a great opportunity with a different narrative and a different government to say, look, we did this and it's all right. We can live without this, that and the other. So come on, let's change. You know, everything's going to shift very quickly.
I'm going to halt us there because we've gone over a little bit from when I intended the break. Duncan, are you happy to hang on to your thing till after the break? So if we take 5 minutes now, so we come back at 8:10, and then I hope to finish by 8:45. So sorry, Tony, did you have a thing?
Yeah, just wondered whether anybody got Blumenthal's telephone number. We could invite him on for the second.
In the meantime, yeah, give him a ring. Or Hugh Fernlington's store could, you know, if you got his phone number, ask him to join us.
I don't enjoy Heston much, but I reckon Hugh would love this chat.
Okay, I'm going to stop it. I'm going to pause the recording as well at this point, and so come back in 5 minutes at 10 past.
Just trying to think about just what sort of level of additional employment, which is good, there's more jobs, but what sort of difference is there between farming and producing stuff your way and producing it the way big business does?
Okay, well, there are kind of two things tied up. One is producing it organically and one is producing it at a smaller scale. I mean, we're, you know, intermediate, you know, I mean, actually a lot of our grading of roots and packing and so on is probably moving towards a, you know, quite a larger scale now. You know, with all those things, the bigger you get, the economies of scale are huge to start with, you know, and then they tail off and actually, you know, and going and to get, you know, to get from our, you know, to get, you'd have to get so much bigger to make any significant difference to the cost. So we already have the economies of scale in in most of what we do, in the packing, in the distribution, and so on. And it's for someone starting on a very small scale, you don't have those economies, and the only way you can make it work is by selling directly to the consumer, really, and taking the retail margin. And typically the farmer gets, in vegetables, the farmer gets somewhere between 20 and 30% of what you pay, but probably closer to 30% of what you pay in the supermarket. And so I guess on the farm, and they're mostly relatively small businesses that we're buying from, their additional costs would be, I don't know, we're probably paying, 10 to 20% more than if we really went to large, massive scale, highly mechanized producers. And, their vegetables, we have done that for potatoes. We did, and they tasted of nothing. They were grown with lots of irrigation, and, the quality was not what we wanted. And of course, the story, wasn't there either. And I think a lot of our customers do like to support, named, smaller scale farmers who do actually get out in the field and do something. I'm not sure whether I'm answering your question. The economies.
It's not so much cost, Guy.
Yeah.
It's how many, bums in tractor seats. Is there a big difference between, employment levels associated with, producing 100 kilos of potatoes your way and producing 100 kilos of potatoes the way that big business does now?
Well, to use that example of potatoes, you cannot. The whole process has to be completely mechanized. You cannot touch a potato, and stay in business now. They're so so they're planted mechanically, they're harvested mechanically, they're graded mechanically. We do have someone watching them go over the grader, but we're about to replace them with a kind of a magic eye thing, which will reject irregularities. And you just can't be in the business doing it any other way. You can grow speciality you can grow pink fir apple potatoes and sell them at a premium or something on a farmer's market, but even there you'll be struggling. The opportunity for smaller scale production is in the more labor intensive stuff that you can't mechanize, so like growing strawberries and herbs and more sort of speciality vegetables, and it's essentially more perishable stuff and more delicate stuff that can't be so machine harvested. I am not in favor of going back to doing everything by hand. I'm really not. Farmers want to earn minimum wage and go on holidays, and their staff want to, and have decent houses just like everybody else, and you just absolutely cannot do that with the current food prices, unless it's done, unless you enjoy the benefits of mechanization. I find it a bit bizarre, in some industries like, dairy, how that's being driven to scale, a really scary rate. And I sort of struggle to understand the economics of that. My father started milking 20 cows. When my brother took over, he had 2 herds of 100. Now he has 1 herd of 300, and he's actually now one of the smaller producers in our area. That they are, they're getting into the thousands now, and and the economies there are just sort of tiny, and it's pretty horrendous. You look, just we neighbour one of those farms. There is not a tree. There's not a hedge. The cows are inside almost all the time. They're fed on maize silage, which is probably the most environmentally destructive crop in the country. It is that relentless drive to scale, particularly in livestock, in dairy. It used to be, it started with chickens, then it was pigs, and now it's dairy. The drive towards large scale factory farming, and it's happening at a scary pace. Just drive around the country and ask yourself, where are the cows? If you're in a dairying area, you'll still see beef animals outside, but you won't see many cows now. They're all indoors.
Where are the goats? That's the other.
Where are the goats? Yeah, all that goats.
Where indeed?
Where is the goat?
You can probably smell them.
It's really true. You won't see goats outside. They're all indoor reared. It's kind of we're told that goat's milk is a great alternative, but it really isn't. It's quite awful. I have to say, I quite like a pornographic potato myself. I'd rather have one of those any day.
Geeti's quite critical of potatoes. I have to say, I don't think they are our finest product. Yeah.
Yeah, Michelle, I don't know if you can hear me. Before the break, you also had your hand up. Did you want to come back?
No.
I can't remember.
Oh,
It's probably not far from the truth that Richard's actually saying now, but I did want to say, sorry about this, folks. Who are you anyway? But I was just going to say, I mean, maybe it's the demands that you're under, or the way that we are on this earth today, this instant gratification of all things, and the demand there has got to be met. So really, what you're doing is it's your own conscience about making things good, and in that, trying to make it work in the commercial world. How do you respond to that?
I mentioned at the beginning, speaking at the International Retailing Conference, actually Geeti came with me. She hated it so much that she left before I even went on stage. It was that. Anyway, I'm trying to remember what I was saying. Oh yeah, the whole mantra of that is that the customer's always right. And as Julian Rose, isn't there, used to be Stuart Rose used to be head of M&S. You know, he was on before me, and his mantra was, you know, the customer is right. They'll pay what they want for what they want, when they want to buy it. Actually, he did even say they'll pay what they want now as well. And I completely reject that. The customer is confused. Often they don't know what they want. They don't know what quality is. They don't know what they certainly don't understand all the politics and environmental stuff behind how it's produced. You know, most of them, I think, often want to be led by someone that they trust. And so trust is a huge word. And I think the story to Riverford's success almost lies in that word, actually, is that we do enjoy a huge amount of trust and support from our customers, which it does allow us to do things our own way and to say, you know, it's November, you must eat a radicchio. Because the lettuce season's over and that's the only salad there is.
Well, we went out and bought strawberries an hour ago.
Sorry?
We went out and bought strawberries, raspberries.
Well, I bet those strawberries taste bloody hideous.
Yeah.
What taste? You're absolutely right.
I mean, strawberries in November and December are the worst.
But I think we should really take heart in it. So people trust a business with integrity, and people are quite excited by that. And more and more businesses are pushing their integrity as being a really important aspect of knowing what their customers want. And it's quite exciting.
And this is really the important thing, isn't it? To get your message out there. I mean, I often get frustrated about these good things that you hear about people doing, and you want to join them, you want to support them. And how have you advertised yourself? How are you promoting yourselves?
Social media is brilliant
to change their minds.
But social media is, I mean, although, you know, we're at the hands of Zuckerberg and Facebook and Instagram, and I resent it so much that I have to use it in my business, but it is people-to-people conversation. We're not reliant on the media to pass on our message. It's when I opened my restaurant 30 years ago, you know, it was absolutely politically driven right from the very beginning to its very core, but trying to get journalists to talk about that was virtually impossible. Now I can talk about it. I never got a journalist to mention the fact that our tampons were organic in the loos. They just wouldn't do it. Now I can talk about my organic tampons to people and they love it. You know, that is an exciting shift.
I mean, the other way in which I believe that there could be trust re-established is a proper regulation of things. I think before the break we took a look at sort of the role of multinational chemical operations, agronomy and all that. And I guess your your relative who was at agricultural college had these sorts of influences over them all, you know, over him all the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think I do believe that science, you know, that the sort of technology of agriculture has been thoroughly corrupted by the capitalist interests, so that you can't get at the truth of you know, of things to do with pesticides and insecticides and the technology of the soil, because there's so many huge capital interests.
The organic movement has, sorry, you were about
I just wanted to backtrack a bit. We were talking about trust and getting, it's not just customers now. You know, now that we have this post-Brexit, you know, we have this labour shortage in this country. And actually this was happening even before that. If you want to get the best people to work for you, and that, you know, that's becoming absolutely mission critical. You know, Riverford, we've had to reduce our range repeatedly through COVID because we just can't get the staff, you know, and we you know, we have a great reputation as an employer and are doing much better than most people. So it's really hitting us hard, the access, and the way to get access to staff, particularly young staff, you know, is by being a good employer, by getting a great reputation locally, you know, by being values driven, by standing for the sort of things that young people, well, actually all people, you know, want to see, which are, you know, being part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And I do think that is possibly going to be more, is going to shape business in a more way.
I mean, Guy, I just find that your independence is admirable, right? Don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing, you know, I think that's great. But the the massive farmers in this country, they're tyrannized by these sorts of people who say, you know, you can't function unless you got this chemical or that chemical. They're tyrannized, and they can only be sort of, I think it's only government who could say, you know, what is it? All those independent scientific centres who used to do the studies, they've all been done away with, haven't they?
Well, they were, I remember when I started back in 1986, there was ADAS, the Agricultural Development and Advisory Service, which is something I think had come about during the war, actually, when there was the drive to produce more, you know, at home.
Like the Archers.
Like the Archers, yeah. And you know, and you know, make sure that they were privatised fairly quickly, and there's nothing available now. And the private agronomists came in their place. I also farm in France, actually. I've got a farm there where we do have a local group sponsored by the local Chamber of Commerce, which is roughly 50% organic farmers and 50% non-organic farmers, but they are working together to find out how they can produce food with less pesticides, essentially. And that is supported by the local Chamber of Commerce. We don't have anything like that in this country. And you know, the neglect of, you know, in terms of training and skill development, and then to have Boris turn around and tell us that the reason that we have a labour crisis is because we haven't looked after our staff. It's just hard not to choke on it, really. You know, when they've savaged FE spending, cut by 50% in the last 10 years.
And has trading standards, so the people who hold you to account your behaviour being cut by 50%. What I think is quite interesting about France, though, is that what did you call them? The Chamber of Commerce, yeah. So the local Chamber of Commerce can actually reject Guy as a farmer because they don't like how he farms. They have the power to manage who buys the farms locally, which is just beautifully, I mean, beautiful in theory, although I suspect lots of backhanders are involved rather than
I think there is a fair amount of corruption, but the bit I like about it is that it's all so opaque and complex. Is that of any speculator would just run a mile. So land in France is 1/10 of the price of land in the UK, and probably 1/20th of the price of land in Holland. It's extraordinary, and because people don't speculate on it, because you know there's too much government intervention. It's kind of quite interesting.
Could I just, Anthony, you had your hand up a while back because you wanted to say something.
Yes, please. Yeah. Yes, actually, it's interesting that you should talk about France and you were talking earlier on about pornographic potatoes. I somebody talking about the tyranny of the market, and there is this thing about potatoes and carrots have got to be a certain size and shape and everything for people to buy them. And then going back to your thing about the machine that sorts out, say the potatoes, what happens to the ones that get rejected? You know, there's even Morrison's where I do some of my shopping. You can buy wonky carrots and wonky potatoes.
Yeah.
So it is, how do we get away from the idea that, say, a carrot has got to be a particularly beautiful shape?
We have much broader specifications than any supermarket, you know, would have. But we do not want to deliver people potatoes that are full of wireworm, which the wireworm's been a real problem. This, you know, and then you spend, you know, ages peeling your potatoes, and you go and cut them up, and they've all got holes through them. You know, that is just not. We're not going to keep customers if we do that. So it's not cosmetic. You know, it's culinary perfection that we're after, and we do have much broader specifications. But there is a limit to how far, you know, we can go. You know, we will often put 2, you know, if the cauliflowers are small, we'll put 2 in, you know, and you know, and that has been a problem. You know, actually Romanesco, those green spiral cauliflowers, we had a lot of trouble with this year. They've all been very small, and we've given 2 or even 3 sometimes. You know, whereas a supermarket would just reject them. So our wastage is sort of 1 to 2%, and even then it's not wastage. We will use, for some, goes to our staff canteen. We have a brilliant staff canteen. We have a restaurant on the farm. Some goes there. Some goes to a local food charity, and then the rest goes either to the cows or composted and back onto the field. There's no kind of waste as such. Yeah.
We eat off the compost heap quite often.
Could I move on to another kind of shift of direction? At the beginning, Guy, when we were chatting before we started, I meant we had a kind of chat about the Wellingborough diggers and the digger movement in the 17th century, which for the rest of us on the Zoom, we're very keen to continue the tradition of the digger movement. And there's the famous quote from Gerard Winstanley about the land is a common treasury for all, and that no one should own the land for their own use, that in a sense there's a commonality about land ownership, and the produce of the land should be held in common. And therefore I'm quite interested in exploring a little bit more about the ownership of Riverford, where you move towards being a cooperative, and how significant is it that land ownership of farmland perhaps needs to move. I mean, we're socialists and we're looking way ahead, you know, but these things are likely to be on the agenda in the next. Is there a case for communal ownership of land and cooperatives running the farming industry as both consumers and as producers? Is this a model? Is this a model for the future?
Before you, no, I don't want to answer. Just before you answer, I do want to say that Guy put the land into employee ownership as well, and that is really unusual for the land and the buildings. That was all handed over to employee ownership. It's really unusual. So
and the intellectual property, which was
all
probably the
of
most
it.
valuable.
I'm very proud.
No, it's a feature of Riverford, which I think is also a selling point, frankly.
I do have quite strong feelings about land ownership, and I think it's, on the whole, it's pretty innate. You know, all property is theft, and that applies no more, you know, through strongly than to land. I think, you know, it was given to us all, or whatever, whether you believe in God or not. I did actually. He did write. God has given the world to everyone, you know, and I did a little bit of research on the diggers, levelers, and ranters earlier this evening, and they were all quite godly people, weren't they? And
well, in the 16th century, everything was interpreted through there weren't any atheists around. Everything was interpreted through biblical sources. And
I just don't understand Christians who do not believe that if God created this wonderful world, that they don't feel that there's an obligation to look after it and indeed to share it. You know, I just don't understand any ethical basis which is about, you know, accumulating more and more, consuming. 50% of climate change is caused by 1% of the global population. I mean, it is totally iniquitous. And then there's the whole issue about, you know, who's going to get paid for sequestering this carbon. I mean, it seems incredible. Farmers are getting really pleased with themselves that they're going to be carbon neutral. My God, if they can't be carbon neutral, they've got to be carbon positive to make up for everyone else. It's just, it's incredible, you know, and I don't believe I'm not, you know, to my mind, when you own the land, you own the ability to grow food on it and that productive thing. The rest of it, you know, I think everybody should have, you know, access to the land to walk over it. And whatever, and you know, I guess that goes with the employee ownership and what we're doing. Where Geeti, and you know, when the money that I took from Riverford, I sold it about a quarter of its what I was told by the accountants it's worth.
Can I ask you, are you likely to stand for president of the NFU?
I'm not an NFU member, so not
you surprise me.
I've had some pretty powerful fallings out with them. I don't quite know what to make of Annette Batters, their current president. I mean, you know, the fact that even they elected a woman is pretty extraordinary.
Extraordinary how that happened. Helen Archer, it should have been. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm not quite sure. I think she's doing a pretty good job of not just being a Tory stooge, which is
right.
I think she's been quite shocked by them, actually.
I think, well, I just don't think, you know, that they were told one thing over Brexit and trade deals, and it's turned out to be a pack of lies. I mean, I think there are a lot of farmers who would have 90% voted for Tory and 90% voted for Brexit. I don't know what's going to happen in the next election, because they've really been totally shafted, and they haven't even seen it yet. I mean, really, the next 2 or 3 years are going to be really bad for farming.
Basically, Brexit is not good for farmers ultimately, or
absolutely terrible. I mean, most, you know, and it was all so completely predictable, you know. But it doesn't say a lot for anyway. We're not.
Oh, it's good. I know it extends the subject a bit, but thanks for touching on it.
Right. Yeah.
Could I ask a kind of a follow-up question? I mean, there's been as we know, a settlement this week. In India over the farming.
Tell you a little bit, Paul, just a little bit about our version of the diggers.
Yeah.
So we bought this farm up the valley. It's a pretty god-awful farm in many ways, and we are growing some vegetables here. And I really wanted the people growing the vegetables to be their business. But as a matter of fact, they didn't want it to be their business. They wanted me to own it. You know, various complications, but they more or less run it on their own. And we now have 4 other businesses on very small scale who are producing food on the farm, and we are what I would call a kind of facilitative landlord, so that we will make the land available. Land people, sorry, Geeti, yeah, absolutely right. So we make the compost, we spread the compost, we do the heavy kind of mechanical work, and then they get on. And one of them grows perennial plants, which they sell to perennial vegetables they sell to gardeners. One grows heirloom seeds that they sell to gardeners. Another one grows dyes plants that are sold to weavers and whatever for dyeing cloth, and the other one is growing vegetables on a very small scale to sell to Geeti's pub and
pornographic veg.
Excellent.
And it's really
I'm going to come to eat at your restaurant when I'm down your way.
To have these 20 people or so on a farm, which would have employed one person, and to have them all working together, but doing their own thing with their own sort of autonomy. I do think it's a really interesting model, and it seems to work beautifully, and it's taken, I don't know, 4 or 5 years for it to come together, but it really does feel like it's happening, doesn't it?
It's such a great collection of waifs and strays.
They're all quite an odd bunch. Yeah, anyway, so that's my version of the diggers.
No, I mean, do you think that this is a model in the sense of common ownership of land, but then subcontracted to small. I mean, small can be defined in fairly, in ways, but cooperatives. Is this a model for future farming?
Yeah, I think fundamentally no doubt, market economics and based on competition have delivered some absolutely wonderful stuff. And, it would be naive to deny some of the benefits that's brought. But I think we completely overlook the benefits that can come from cooperation, actually. And we are appalling at it in this country. Having worked in France and having lots of friends who farm in Holland and elsewhere in Europe, they're so much better at it. And as a result, they still have more smaller and medium-sized farmers. The US and the UK are really outliers in terms of this, neoliberal market. Anyway, I've said enough about that.
But that's slightly different though, isn't it? Because Paul's talking about common ownership of land that's rented out, which isn't the same as Holland and France.
It's not.
It's ownership. They're just in very small plots, so you do get the market gardeners all over the place.
But I think the point is that the way to make it work, I've said that, the way to make it work within the world as we find it at the moment, with these brutal sort of market-based economics and benefits of scale, the way to make it work is by cooperation. So the co-op that supplies Riverford, which I helped to establish back in the 90s, they share machinery, they have a labour pool, they share technical expertise, and they don't have to worry about marketing because Riverford buys it all. And it works fantastically well. They're almost the only vegetable producers in South Devon now. Everyone else has gone out of business, but by virtue of the fact that they sort of cooperate and have a secure market, it's still working.
But also common ownership of the land also protects the land for farming.
Yeah,
and takes it. I mean, currently, the biggest problem also with land ownership being in private hands is, of course, certainly around Wellingborough and in Northamptonshire, we're just being taken over by distribution companies. Land is disappearing rapidly into the market economy for distribution and warehousing, and not even to produce anything. It's just a distribution.
Are there any examples of common ownership land working like this around the world that you know?
Well, I think in France there are cooperatives in France. My understanding is that in France and in Italy there was a tradition of cooperatives. I'm not sure about common ownership of the land per se, but certainly cooperatives are far more powerful on the continent, and also in other parts of the world as well.
France does really well on cooperatives, but they restrict how much land you can own is controlled but through the inheritance system of land, which is really interesting. So, Guy talks about when he was looking for his farm in France, that actually he just kept on finding these farms that had little strips in the middle that were owned by other people.
I know. France is crazy, because every time somebody dies, if you've got 3 or 4 people who inherit, they all inherit different parts of the land. And so it's constantly splitting up.
You're legally obliged to divide it before.
Exactly.
On this farm, it's quite unusual, and it is mostly in one block, but there are a couple of strips running through it. But about once a year, I have to go and have aperitifs with this woman who just hates the English, but she owns a little.
She doesn't want to sell either, presumably.
She owns a little bit in the middle of my farm, which she can't get access to, because she has to come across my land. But I can't drain it. I can't do anything with it, because it's just completely bonkers. But it's kind of
great, because it curbs the big bastards who are going to take it over. It's great.
I've got to just, on land ownership, I do have to put in one. It just seems totally iniquitous that so much is owned by so few. However, in defence of those so few, I remember I went to a thing this spring with our 3 landed gentries, and one of whom was a complete and utter pheasant shooting twat. But the other 2 were really good people. One of them, he just took his responsibility to his estate. It's one of the most beautiful bits of Devon. And he looks after it so well. He farms organically. He drives around in a little Skoda. He's the most humble. He is the true conservative. He's the acceptable.
Well,
face
he could still do that,
down the
but his
wall.
but his land would be owned collectively by all of us. But he could still do what he wanted to do. It would still be subcontracted to him or leased to him or what have you. But so much land is owned by people that you can't touch. They and all they're interested in is the bottom line.
Yeah.
So the Duke of Westminster, the Duke of Buccleuch, who Roy and Marta know well with the run-ins for the Duke of Buccleuch in Northamptonshire, he owns about half of 3/4 of Northamptonshire. And the Lord of Northampton, who owns Grendon in Northamptonshire. I mean, all these big, huge landowners are a real pain in the arse, frankly.
I don't even put too much on Guy in terms of revolution, actually, Paul.
Do you think so? Maybe I'm asking too much.
He might charge you extra
for
your veggie boxes if you carry on.
Yeah.
I think.
I'm glad you.
But Marta wants to come in. I prompted her to come in. Marta.
No, you just made me think about when you talked about sharing of land and so on, of the ex-president of Uruguay, Pepe Mujica. You may find an interview of him. He's not the president now. An interview of him by somebody from Al Jazeera. He's a very, very ordinary man who's made incredibly powerful speeches at the UN about the environment, about life, about love. I mean, he's amazing. And he lives in an ordinary farm, which he shares with the workers. He's given it to the workers. So I just thought I'd mention him. Very interesting man.
Isn't there also, Marta, isn't there also this town, this village in Spain that runs on cooperative lines?
That's right.
How does that work?
I don't know, but I know that the mayor is a very important man, and the town is called Marinaleda or something like that. And yeah, they haven't experienced the problems that all the other the rest of Spain or other countries have experienced, say, I don't know, 2008 and all the rest of it, because they worked and functioned on socialist lines.
Is that in the Basque region? It's not part of the modern.
No, it's not. No, it's Andalusia. It's Marinaleda.
Okay.
Yeah.
We buy a lot of vegetables from Andalusia. I haven't seen anything very enlightened in the
No. I remember seeing horrible things when we were in the tip of Spain. It was really frightening. These mountains that were all white.
The polytunnels.
Yeah, polytunnels.
Miles after miles after miles of polytunnels growing tomatoes, weren't they?
And the way they treat
the workers
there as well. Yeah.
I'm glad, Paul, that you mentioned India and the success.
Yeah, we did. I was taken off beam. I mean, I know very little about the situation in India, but it does sound like there's been a significant victory for the farmers in the Punjab
I think so.
against the Modi government.
They must have faced a huge weight of, financial and capitalist, probably international capitalist interest in change, in transforming that.
They had just they just seemed to keep going, and in the end they won, and they're unwinnable.
It's great
because it's mostly from the Punjab, wasn't it? Because that's the kind of the breadbasket of India.
Yeah,
I mean, I've been there, and there seem to be lots and lots of small farms, family-owned farms, and possibly cooperatives as well. I think certainly there's a lot of cooperatives that help with distribution, and so I'm sure I saw a lot of signs that said something cooperative while travelling through the Punjab in particular. But so there must have been something been going on there, which is by and large escaped the rest of the world. But they've clearly won a significant victory against kind of government and corporate interests that wanted to switch farming perhaps to more intensive forms of and larger forms of farming.
Perhaps they fought a battle for lots of farmers all over the world, in a sense.
What was interesting, when I worked 30 years ago in the Middle East, and I was responsible for doing a study on agricultural cooperatives in Gaza, which was set up on a British mandate. And it seems that part of the legacy of the empire was actually the encouragement of small holdings and stuff across poorer parts of the world and in areas where there were disputes between people and rivals.
Well, there was an incredible, if you look after the war, when we were passing on our empire, that's when we set up all the council small holdings, and there was that movement to, all if you go up around Cambridge, there are these incredible kind of like 3-acre farms with intensive glass on them. They're all set up, right after the war. There was a real, it was an incredible time. Sorry, Geeti wants to tell you something.
True.
Hugh Fenley Rittenstall wants the Zoom link to come and say hello.
Does he? Oh, yeah. Excellent.
How do I do it?
I can probably send it.
You just send him the link and he clicks on it.
Oh, no,
I'll tell him, guys, sending it. Well, we need to have something to say. Okay, what shall I? Anyway.
Well, we need to think quickly, folks, to get some questions to Hugh.
Yeah, exactly. What do we want to know?
I'm just trying to find you.
But maybe it's just dull. But I did ask him.
Can we be invited to his Christmas dinner, perhaps? I mean, I know he invites everybody to these big, huge Christmas gatherings, doesn't he?
I think we could ask him about the common land ownership thing. I think he'd be really interested in that.
Does he actually farm himself?
He has a small holding, and he does farm he really does grow. He has a very big.
He grows his own stuff for his restaurant, doesn't he?
He does it for himself though at home. So he has a big allotment where he grows his own veg, and he's really passionate and excited about it. And then he has his, rears his pig and he kills it, and that's all his home life. There's the kind of performance telly stuff, but that he really does live it. Okay.
While we're waiting for Hugh to appear, Marta's posted in the chat about the Marinaleda, is it how you pronounce it? The Spanish municipality, province of Seville, which runs on cooperative lines. And what's the name of the president, the ex-president? I read about him as well.
Mujica.
Yeah, I've read about him as well, but is he still alive?
Yes.
Because he was quite elderly, wasn't he? Well,
yes.
He is quite elderly.
Vice president of the country at the moment.
Hey everyone, I gotta go. Thank you very much.
Okay. No problem,
thank you so much.
Nice to see you.
Interesting. And incidentally, just on a revolutionary note, not really perhaps your cup of tea, Guy, I've no idea, but you never know. Land ownership. It's virtually impossible to go to the registry office and find out who owns it all. It's all deeply fragmented. It's deliberate. We need to push for the register, the way the register works, to be changed, so we can all understand who actually owns it all. Because it's a sort of start point for rather a lot of stuff. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thanks, Duncan.
To Wellingborough, and I've got to just finish the supper.
We'll be in touch.
Now, who's typing? What am I supposed to do with them? I can't not. We're all going to have to sit here now.
You've got to wait now because I think Hugh's coming on.
Yeah, we've got to wait for Hugh.
Oh no, I've sent it to the wrong email.
Ask the question. Can I ask the question whilst we're waiting for Hugh?
No,
have you or anyone, do you know of anyone that might be thinking about offering some kind of like organic apprenticeships and going to the colleges to bring on the new ideas and the new people to start making it look and feel sexy to work on farms?
Well, actually,
pornographic.
Yeah, pornographic vegetables would work, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you dress them up.
Sorry, Guy, I interrupted.
Oh, I don't know. But honestly, it's by the time he
He's
gets
all
on.
excited by you all now.
Do you want me to?
The link, Paul.
Do you want me to post the link?
Yeah, well, you send it. Hugh FW.
Just a minute. I've got to find the link. Just 1 second. So there's the Zoom.
Wait, if this is tedious for everyone, we really don't have to bother.
No, that's all right, because we got on a really good subject, making vegetables sexy. So you know, we can take it from there. Bring on the young generation and give it credibility and give it, you know, a heightened sort of you know, respectable thing about, my God, you're an organic farmer. Oh, I want to marry you.
No, it's just waiting for you.
Ban them.
I can't find the link now. Where the hell is the link?
I'm sorry, I've just.
Your email, Paul.
Yeah, I can't find my email.
Guy, don't disappear.
We can do it on here. And then send it on the chat. Send it on the chat here. Type a message. What's the link?
Yeah, I've got it now.
Oh, you've got it. Okay.
Okay, so let me send it to Hugh.
Hugh FW. Oh, Hugh Fuckwit.
Hugh, H-A, how do you spell Hugh? G-A, Hugh FW.
At rivercottage.net.
At rivercottage.net. How do you spell Q? H-U-G-H, isn't it? I put huge. Huge FW at rivercottage.net.
Yeah, but it's not huge, it's H-U-G-H.
That's it, yeah. No, I typed huge originally. Zoom meeting.
I think it just shows what a sweet bloke he is, that he's just like, yeah, that sounds great. Let me join in. He is
right.
A nice
I've just sent it to him. Hope it.
So tell us quickly a little bit about Hugh.
What I really like about him is how he's so passionate about the small producers and growers and all the really interesting and extraordinary things that they do, and he really champions them, really, and it's been a constant support and champion. So when he writes books, for example, if he writes a book about mushrooms, it won't be Hugh writing about mushrooms, it will be under the River Cottage brand and Hugh's name will be there, but it will be the person who's writing about mushrooms that gets all the credit. He's not into taking the credit like all other celebrity chefs will get other people to ghostwrite their books and they take all the credit. And Hugh, it's not about that for him. It's absolutely about supporting this other way of producing food and trying to push people to do it in a different way. So I think it's really fantastic. In the same way that, you know, Jamie Oliver has lots of ghostwriters. I don't think he writes anything actually, but you know, his passion in engaging people and eating real food and his works he did with schools was really extraordinary. I mean, apart from anything else, it just made us understand why, you know, what you're up against when you know, we talk about trying to change how we procure food in schools, but what you're up against is that culture that blocks you constantly. And in the restaurants I had in London, I worked very closely with schools to try and help them change their menus. And it's really hard. These kids don't know anything. We used to take our teams in the holidays to try and well, these were kids who were most likely to spend the entire holiday sitting in front of the telly and have nothing else going on in their lives. And we used to go and try and teach these kids. It was more entertainment than anything else on how to cook meals. So one of the things I was determined that it wasn't going to be sugar, which is what most schools do. You know, they teach you how to cook a cake. So we'd do pasta pesto, pasta, garlic, basil, you know, olive oil. And we would line these ingredients up in front of secondary school kids and say, what are they? Where do they come from? What, you know, what's their narrative? What's their culture? They didn't know it. Not even pasta. Oh, absolutely terrifying. All right. So he says he needs a password and he can only do idiot Zoom. What do we think?
There's no password.
Come on, I think
I
it's
think
9
we should
o'clock.
quit.
I think
Yeah. There's no password, but it doesn't matter.
It's up to you. If you want me to keep.
No, let's go.
No. Perhaps we could arrange another one some other time with Hugh. I'm sure we could, if we could get it together. So no, I think we should now begin to wind it up. It's now 9 o'clock. We've been on air now for 2 hours, so I think it's now time. I've just got one announcement before we go, and on the 15th of December, for those that are the ISW people that are here, we have our ISW Christmas do in the Queen's Head pub at was it 7:30, Tony?
8 o'clock, 8 till 10.
8 o'clock in the Queen's Head pub in Wellingborough on the 15th of Wednesday, the 15th of December. We've got some music from Rob Matheson and others, we hope, some live music, and we've got a vegetarian food menu, vegetarian curry. Not sure whether it's organic or not, that's up to the pub, but we did ask for a vegetarian curry. And our sponsors,
it'll be vegan, actually.
Will it be vegan?
Vegan.
Yeah, it's a vegan stroke vegetarian curry, but may not be organic.
That's true. That's true.
But we're getting very close to it if it's vegan and vegetables, isn't it? So anyway, Guy, thank you so much for being with us tonight for 2 hours. I think it's been quite fun, actually. I didn't think it'd be quite so much fun. And we've touched on some really serious issues which aren't going to go away at all. And I did say earlier, I hope that we might be able to extend an invitation for you to come to Wellingborough personally for the Wellingborough Digger Festival. You'll have to consider whether you can make it up here or not. But it'd be nice to have a pint, to meet over a pint rather than over Zoom. But if you can't make it, that's fine as well. And it's really been good that Geeti has also got involved in tonight as well.
Thank you very much.
And please thank her. She's no longer in the thread, but she added another dimension to some of the discussions that we've had tonight, and that was really welcome. So please pass on our thanks for that.
Thanks all of you. Yeah.
And please take out some boxes, comrades, with Riverford. I mean, Michelle, if you want to talk to Peter and I about it, we do it. And Marta, if you want to get the co-op to start to stock Riverford boxes, I'm sure that Guy and his colleagues would welcome a discussion about the Marta's on the board of a local co-op.
All right. Okay.
A cooperative store, regional. What's it? East Midlands Co-op.
Central England Co-op.
Central England Co-op. She's on the board, so it's a good opportunity as well, Marta, to promote organic.
Absolutely. In fact, I suggested 3 or 4 names for our strategy day in July, and you and Geeti were at the top of my list. So I hope that at some point we'll be able to invite you. We'll invite you and have some discussions. And
Guys, ISW, Independent Socialists, we're a small group, but powerful and influential. We have tentacles that spread way out of Wellingborough into other areas. And the
Three
trade
parts.
union movement, the cooperative movement. We had your
Yes.
namesake Guy Standing, who's based in Geneva, works for the UN, who also has been to our meeting. So you're in, we're a we're a bit like Davros, really. You know,
absolutely
Davros, the
like
group that runs the world,
Yeah, you got it.
the Davros nations, or is it the Bilderberg group, is it? That runs the world. We're the socialist equivalent.
Oh, I have a question.
Based in Wellingborough.
How long have we been the acorn, which will inevitably turn into the oak tree, though? That's the whole point.
Exactly.
But we're an acorn with potential.
Yeah.
But yes, we're a wonderful alliance, like-minded people. Yeah. And you've earned your commission tonight.
Anyway, thank you very much again, Guy, and thank you everybody for coming along. And our next ISW meeting will be in January, but we've got the social on the 15th of December. I hope to see you all then, along with the people who aren't here tonight. Okay.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.